when a traditional change gets stuck, how to use appreciative inquiry to move things forward. Had a little bit of a chat at the beginning about whether people were familiar with appreciative inquiry or new to it. There's not going to be a big explanation of the model and all the rest of it, but hopefully enough of an understanding of how you can use it. So, okay. Right. All I need to do is move a slide forward. Okay. So what I want to cover today is giving you a taste of appreciative inquiry, looking at what traditional change is good for and what it's not, and how we can use this different approach, appreciative inquiry, when traditional change gets stuck. We're going to work or I'm going to talk about a case study. I'm going to leave you with top tips and takeaways about how you can apply this hopefully in your own arena. And I want to introduce you briefly to the shop that I run that has lots of different organizational development type tools and the discount code specifically for this audience. So moving swiftly on, the first thing we're going to do is have a little bit of a taste of appreciative inquiry. So we're going to get you into pairs for 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is to introduce yourself. So here's a chance to meet someone, a bit of the old networking. And then take a moment to identify one good thing that has happened to you or that you have been a part of this week, a highlight moment of this week. It doesn't have to be at work, it could be at home, but just a moment this week when you felt really good, really alive, something was going well, it was an achievement, a success, a connection, something really good. Just share it with your colleague and listen to their story and just be curious and help each other to expand on the story if the time allows, so that you kind of, just for a brief moment, you relive that moment fully. And we're only going to get 5 minutes, so quick introduction and then share an experience, a recent experience that, as I say, was a good thing. So that was a kind of a little taste of appreciative inquiry and a notification of how asking these kind of questions can impact directly on our emotional state. So I hope you felt that. This one, yeah. So hopefully you'll recognize this as well. Traditional approaches to change, very logical, built around plans, a little bit of diagnosis. It's also known as the diagnostic approach towards change. And what I want to do now is just spend a few minutes for yourselves to explore some of your experience of planned change processes in organizations. So again, it's going to be very short. We've got another chance to meet some more people. So hopefully this time in groups of 4. The question really is, during a change implementation, when your organization has been making some big change, have you ever felt disempowered? Have you ever felt that it's all just happening to you, it's being done to you, you're just waiting for someone to tell you what to do? If not, if you didn't have that feeling, that's great. And can you share something about what made it possible for you during that change to feel empowered and proactive? But if yes, how did you personally cope with the feelings that the change had induced in you? So we're kind of looking at the idea of empowerment or lack of during a change process. So again, if I could just ask you to put people into groups of 4, just for 5 minutes, and just quick share of some of your experiences of a planned change process, traditional change.
There you go. The groups have been open. See you folks in 5 minutes.
Experiences about.
Recorded.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm sure there will have been a variety of experiences of traditional change, and I suspect there hasn't been a shortage of experience to share. What I want to look at is what quite often can happen during planned change processes, during the implementation stage. It's very easy for people to feel that they're being done to. There's a small group that's planning all the change and it's being implemented through the organization. And it's very easy for people to fall into passivity and reactivity, waiting for someone to tell them what they're supposed to do. And this can feed into a declining motivation and focus, because we're not quite sure anymore what we're supposed to be focusing on. The old is not what we're supposed to be doing anymore, but we're not completely familiar with what the new is going to be. and there can be a lack of forward direction and forward planning. So there can be a disempowerment and a demoralization, and then things get stuck. The wheels are spinning at the top, but nothing's happening at the bottom of the organization. People just don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And people start to get very frustrated, and the change implementation gets stuck. So one of the reasons this often happens is because a diagnostic, planned, traditional change approach is applied to what we call a wicked problem, which is a different sort of problem. So we've got logical problems, and then we've got wicked problems. And wicked problems are problems that are difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. A problem whose social complexity means it has no determinable stopping point. That means we don't really know when we've solved the problem. We don't know when we've succeeded. And because of the complex interdependencies, the effort to solve one aspect of a wicked problem may reveal or create other problems. So this is really when we're wanting to work with a social system. This is when these conditions apply. So if it's a logical problem, how do I get from A to B within 4 hours? Then we can apply a traditional diagnostic, what are the options? What are the criteria? What's the answer? But when it's a kind of social thing, how do we help people work better together? How do we change the culture around here? How do we improve the patient experience in terms of our relationship with them or something? This is a very different challenge. And a lot of the difficulties, in my experience, that arrive in change programs is because of the misapplication of a diagnostic approach to change to a form of a change challenge that we would call wicked. And wicked isn't a moral term. It denotes a resistance to resolution. You cannot resolve this problem. You can keep moving forward to it. You can make changes, but it's never really going to be solved. So it needs a different approach. And this is the difference between the diagnostic and the dialogic approach to change. Appreciative inquiry fits very clearly in a dialogic approach to change. So with diagnostic, it's a lot about creating detailed plans. We're thinking in a problem-solving way. We're directing people's action. It's about having the answers. It's about monitoring how the change plan is being implemented. It's often about fault finding, who's doing the things wrong that's stopping the change working, and very rigid control of plan breaches. So when other things happen, it's seen that someone got something wrong. The dialogic approach is much more about creating the conditions for change. We need to create an environment where something different can happen that's going to be more productive for us. We're interested in problem setting. What is the question? What is the problem we're trying to engage with? What are the questions we need to be asking rather than actually finding the answer? Very much about co-creation. We're talking about a social system that needs to be relating and behaving together differently to allow something different to happen. And we need to co-create that change in the whole system. It's about having the questions. It's about helping people coordinate their actions rather than having a rigid control plan which directs what everybody has to do. It's about creating coherence, so there's sufficient understanding and sufficient sense making that the bits join together. Very much about directing the organization's attention. What do we want people to be paying attention to? How are we going to notice the first small steps of change in the right direction? How are we going to keep morale up by helping people identify successes while they're dealing with the difficulties of doing something different? And it's very much about nurturing and amplifying small changes in the right direction. So this is the idea that we identify what it is we want more of, and we try to grow it by focusing on it, by attending to it, by amplifying it, by talking about it, by raising awareness of it. We do have a tendency with the planned change to kind of think, this is where we are, that's where we want to be. When we get to where we want to be, then we'll say the change has happened and we'll celebrate. And early changes at the bottom, the early changes are ignored because we're all looking for this kind of when we succeed, when the bridge is built. Over here, it's much more about how will we know when things are starting to move in a different direction that is more helpful to us? What kind of early things are we looking out for? So this is the idea that we need a very different approach when we're dealing with these kind of social dynamic changes in organizations, which are sometimes called wicked problems. So appreciative inquiry is particularly good for these kind of challenges because it embraces and works with the psychology of people and their social system. So with appreciative inquiry, we work with emotion, we work with imagination. We don't see these things as being problematic, which they can be seen in other places. We work with people's initiative, we work with their creativity, all again of which can be, if people don't like their implemented plans, they try and do something different, can be seen as problematic. And in this way, it calls on all human resources, not just the cognitive. It's not just about our logical, rational, cognitive problem-solving abilities. It embraces the complexity, which, whereas implemented change often tries to simplify things, and it seeks only sufficient commonality to make sense and go on. So it's not about it's not about we all have to be singing from the same hymn sheet, those kind of expressions. It's about we just need to be coordinated enough and connected enough and make enough sense together that we can keep moving forward in the direction that we want to go. And this is the co-creation. And it works with voice and story and change in the psychodynamic sense. So it's very suitable for these kind of challenges. So that's great. That's great if you start with a greenfield site, you know, someone says, hey, we've got this change coming up, please come in and help us do it in an appreciative, strengths-based, positive psychology kind of way. But that doesn't always happen. What sometimes happens is that people start down a planned change process, always with the best of intentions, obviously, and then they run into problems and they get to that kind of stuck stage that we were talking about earlier. And so the question is, what can you do at that point? How can you bring this appreciative approach to bear on a change that's already underway and has got stuck? So what I want to do is to take you through a little bit of a case study about this and see what we can learn from it, really. So the company involved that I was working with was doing an IT implementation, and this is classic. The IT implementation gets seen as a technical, logical, rational problem. How are we going to get all the data over? How are we going to get all the kit? You know, where are the wires going to go? And the fact that it's actually a cultural change, that you're going to be asking people to work differently, often gets overlooked. So it's classified by the organization as a kind of technical change challenge, with the cultural change aspects under-recognized. And so they brought in some consultants to help them, and this kind of thing happens. You know, we're doing our plans of how the change is going to go on. However, the problem was they started to meet what they labeled as, and you'll hear this all the time, resistance and lack of buy-in from the rest of the organization. So all this planning activity is happening at a senior level with the change consultants that they've brought in. But the rest of the organization is, you know, what's going on here? I just don't understand. And that's being classified as resistance or lack of buy-in. And the message is going out that you either need to get on the bus or get out. I don't know if you've heard that expression sometimes used. You know, we've had enough of explaining it to you. We've explained it 3 times. You either need to get on the bus or get out. So by the time I got involved, by the time I was asked to come and get involved, people were having to reapply for their jobs because there was a reorganization going on in all of this as well. People were demoralized and demotivated. And so HR asked me to design an intervention, both for the staff and separately for the management, to try to get the situation unstuck, to try to get the change kind of moving again. So I had these 2 opportunities, very short, to 2 to 3 hours with these groups, to try to produce some change. So starting with the management team, we entitled that session, Supporting Teams Through Challenging Times. So there was a 2-hour workshop with a small group of leaders, manager leaders, to help them help their teams. And so what I wanted to do, use that time for, was to help them focus on what they could influence and not what they couldn't. And this is that redirecting of attention that we're working with Appreciative Inquiry. So at this point in time, I'm not questioning what the change they're trying to produce. That's not what this is about. This is about helping people work with it and feel better and feel empowered and have ownership and feel more positive about the whole thing. So this is the redirecting of attention. And the other one is how to energize and motivate their teams, how to create some pull motivations towards the future. So this is the emotional one. How people feel really affects how they behave. It also affects their cognitive state and how creative they can be, how willing they are to work with other people. How they could continue to offer effective leadership during periods of turbulence, because this often destabilizes leaders because they can't offer certainty. They don't know really what's going to happen. So what can they offer? And they need to be able to offer something to feel they're showing leadership. So what does that look like? How do we create and maintain a positive work atmosphere in the face of difficulties, and how to access team resources to help create resilience and optimism? These are two things that can really help with challenge and change. So what we did in the workshop was we thought about and explored what happens to people during change, some of what we did earlier in this kind of workshop, so sort of recognizing the state people might be in. And then we spent some time on the priorities of leadership during change, which is important because they change. And sometimes, depending on the organization, this can be something people know but haven't really brought into language, haven't really brought to the forefront of their minds. But during change, it's all about the change, and it's all about the people. It's not about the whatever I used to spend my time doing. And that when people come to me because they're confused, that's the work, not just an interruption. We spent time doing the leaders' sort of lifeline of their leadership development, how their leadership positions they had, leadership experiences they'd had. And we also got them to tell one of those peak stories about when they had been at their best as a leader at some point. When have you felt at your best as a leader? And we help them identify, this is a small group of individuals, about 8 people, their leadership strengths. What were the things that, what are the strengths that other people can see that you brought to that leadership challenge? And then this is boosting people's resourcefulness, because we bring the resources from the past into a present awareness. When we're in a particular state, like feeling we don't know what to do, we're feeling like failures, we don't understand how we're supposed to be leading, revisiting a good experience from the past where we were effective and competent and successful helps us remember what we've got at our disposal, what resources we can work with. And we looked at how to extend that idea of the kind of confidence boost and resource boost that understanding our strengths can give us with their teams. And also this question of how to maintain morale through the creation and recreation of positive mood states. What often happens during change, because there's turbulence and things are being disturbed, is that the normal rewards in the system diminish. People aren't getting the same praise for the same work because that work isn't what's needed anymore. They're finding it harder to get things done because everything's different. They don't have so much time for each other because everybody's busy, and so on and so forth. So lots of little rewards that help us feel good, little boosts of affirmation, positivity, laughing together can diminish, and then people's moods diminish. So how can we positively create moments of good feeling that give us a little positivity boost? I want to just share an example of a specific thing that happened in the workshop, which again I have found is not kind of uncommon. One of the teams, one of the leaders was, their team was facing closure. In this change that was going on and the reorganization, their team wouldn't exist anymore. Clearly not a great feeling for her or her team. And so we spent some time refocusing the definition of the team's objectives and success criteria. Again, it's just bringing into kind of conscious awareness things have changed. We are now in a different state. Your job as leader, your objective as leader is now different. We need to redefine this so that we can appreciate what success will look like. So the question became, what we were asking was what a really great closing down process would look and feel like. If we do this close down of our team the best we can, how will people be feeling? What will they be saying? How will we be engaging with the rest of the organization? What will they be saying about us? And what would she and her team need to be focusing on to make that happen? So it's no longer so much about meeting the targets, whatever they may be, that may be important. It's much more about how do we do this rundown the best way possible so that people come away feeling boosted by a sense of a job well done rather than a slow fade out and failure. So jettisoning the old definition of success, we deal with so many somethings a day, reduces the feelings of failure. There's a conscious recognition that is not the priority anymore. I'm simplifying. And we create something positive to work towards. So this is appreciative inquiry kind of in action. How can we create hope and choice for the people in our team? How can we give them something positive to work for? What is the best that we can expect here? It's a difficult situation. Nobody wants to be in it. And appreciative inquiry actually works very well in these situations, whereas sometimes people think it's only for the good things. Absolutely not. It is very powerful when times are difficult. Oh, time is marching on. Right. So I wanted to share with you as well, working with the staff team, because this was another interesting little interaction. So we had 2 or 3 of these sessions with, I can't remember, 20 to 40 people, maybe. And so we were looking at 3 questions over 3 hours. What will be different? What does this change actually mean? Always a good question, lots of ways of engaging with that. How will it impact my work, which is obviously what people really want to know. And then how can I positively affect my experience and that of colleagues around me? And this is the sisters doing it for themselves. If we wait for our managers to make things right for us, they've got other things to do. So what can we do for ourselves to help navigate our way through this change and move on from this stuck, disappointed, failing kind of feeling that we're engaged in and caught up in at the moment. And again, there was an interesting particular process that happened during this group. So the first question, although it was about what will be different and so on, released an avalanche of stories about bad management from this group. Managers don't tell us what's going on. They're all too busy to talk to us. They aren't doing this change very well. It's all the manager's fault. They're doing it all wrong. This change is being badly done. So the question that I asked was, has this always been the case? Have your managers always been terrible managers? Or is this experience that you're describing more recent? So it took a while, but the question did go into the group somewhere, because sometime later, 10, 15 minutes later, someone said, it wasn't like this when it started. When the change process started, it wasn't like this. Okay, so how was it when it started? It was very consultative. At the very beginning, we were engaged a lot in what this change would be about, and would be like, and then something changed. And so what were your managers like at that point? Well, they were great. They were very supportive. They wanted to know what we thought. We had great conversations. So what had changed between then and now? And part of the answer to that question was, I said they brought in some experts to help them. That's fine. But somehow everybody's attention had got shifted upwards. So their manager's eyes and attention, instead of being on them, is now much more engaged with the strategy planning change team, working with these outside consultants. And their workload was increasing, which is not at all uncommon. And they probably had their own uncertainties about quite what this change meant for them and their position in the organization. So this is really important, because what this is doing is changing the story. The story is now changing from our managers are bad managers to this is a process we're all involved in that's having an effect on people. Some of these effects that it's having on other people are also having an effect on me. And so by the time we got to the end of the 3 hours, people were moving away from these stories of blame and wanting to punish the people who are, you know, not doing it right, towards actually we're all in this. How can I take my discontent in a more productive way to my manager, so that together we can create a better way of being as a team? You know, how can I, rather than just muttering about them behind their back, how can I in some way engage in a conversation with them about what we need to be able to work well together? And very often in these situations, in my experience, because leaders feel, apart from being distracted and overworked, they often they feel they don't have the answers. Staff are going to come and say, well, where am I going to be sitting in 3 months' time? And what is going to be the core of the job? And how many people will I have to see every day, or whatever it is? And they don't know. And that worries them, that they won't have the answers. And so they avoid the contact, so they don't get the questions. So we have to help leaders understand that their job isn't to have the answers. Their job is to work with the relationship and the emotional state of their team to help everybody find the best way forward, and see what questions maybe they have to ask, either of themselves or kind of the system. So changing the story from the people are bad to the process is difficult and we're all in this together to some extent, released a lot of potential activity for people, and it created hope. And so people left feeling much more positive, much more accepting of the fact that change was going to happen, and that that their managers were also grappling with things. And these are the words they described. They felt more assertive of being able to go and kind of make their needs known. They felt more proactive and choiceful and more courageous. And we did a round of, following this conversation, what are you going to do? And there was some very nice outcome. More than one person said, I'm not going to feed in to the negative stories anymore. If people come to me moaning and groaning, I'm going to ask them, well, what can you do to make this better? Rather than just joining in the moan fest. And other people, as I say, had specific plans. I'm going to talk to a few colleagues, and then I'm going to ask for a meeting with the manager, and I want to raise this particular thing that's really causing us a lot of confusion, and have a conversation about how we can move forward on it, without casting blame, just naming the challenge, as it were. So that was a sort of fairly quick run through, a little case study, which I hope will give you a flavour of how you can bring some of the principles of appreciative inquiry, which is that we work with the emotional state. So we're always looking to try to create positive mood states in people, because we are so much more able to deal with things, more resourceful, more resilient when we're feeling better. That it's about directing people's attention to what they can influence rather than what they can't. It's about working with the stories that we tell about our reality and our world, because those stories have affordances and constraints. They make some things more likely and some things more difficult. And there's always more than one way to talk about a situation. So if the story isn't working, let's change the story. Let's find another way of talking about the same situation that gives us more opportunity to do something different, that opens up different possibilities. It's all about asking questions. So these workshops are just arranged around a few questions that we could have a discussion about. It's not about denying people's difficult experience. The workshop with the staff, we had a lot of talk about how difficult things were, but what I'm always working for is to acknowledge but not amplify. Because if this talk had got them anywhere, if this talk was changing things for them, I wouldn't be sitting in that room. So the talk isn't working. So we need to talk differently. But it takes, you can't just tell people, don't say that, we need to do this. It's how can I find a way in? Where can I find a thread that allows me to move the conversation in a different direction? And it was when someone said, firstly, it was that question, has it always been like this or has it been different? Because the guess is that these managers haven't always been awful. And then the second one was, so what, I can't remember what it was, but anyway, so you're asking questions to move and shift the conversation. Right, I'm aware time is marching on, so let's just do a couple more things. So applied appreciative inquiry, these are the kind of things we're working on. I've just been running through some of them. Working with volunteerism. So the organization very bravely, I said, people need to volunteer to come to these workshops. So we have to make them sound attractive and productive and like they're going to be useful, and people need to be attracted to come to them, because that is all part of the whole kind of proactivity and ownership and agency that you're trying to redevelop, because they've been pushed around enough with the change process. Co-creation, positivity, strengths, it's a big part of appreciative inquiry. So certainly the manager's workshop really worked with strengths and identifying people's strengths. Hope and optimism, proactivity, what can we do? Story and choice, and amplifying success, which again was part of the manager's story particularly. And so, as promised, the top tip takeaways for how you can bring an appreciative inquiry approach to a change that's already started off in the other frame, in a more diagnostic, planned implementation, top-down type change. Focus on what you can influence. So I couldn't influence the whole thing, but I could work with small groups. So focus on what you can influence and help others to do the same. This is what I was doing in the groups. Attend to the stories being created about people and change. Are they useful or aren't they? And if they aren't, can we shift them? Create and recreate states of positive affect. I can't overemphasize how important mood is to our potential to be able to do things and to engage productively with change. Amplifying, creating, amplifying, enlarging a state of hope and choice. Hope and choice. When I've worked with stuck groups, this is what is missing. They have no hope that things are going to get better, no hope for the future, and they feel stuck. They have no choice. It's either this or I leave the organization kind of thing. That's what we need, much more choice. Ideas for the future and ways to move forward, preferably co-created. Starting where people are at and moving them to a more productive place. That's what we're working on, somewhere where they can do something. Using your own attention as a resource and getting other people to use theirs. And in these situations, your role as a leader or a consultant is to ask the questions that will make a difference. And you find out by doing. You have a hypothesis. I think inquiring into this is going to be helpful, and you'll find out by the feedback that comes back. And if it sets off an unhelpful conversation, then you've learned something and you need to ask a different question to try and move things forward. So I hope that's given you an insight into how you can use appreciative inquiry to help with stuck change situations. And I think, as requested, we have a few minutes left for comments, observations, reflections, or questions. So I will stop sharing my screen now so I can see a few more people.
Folks, if you want to use the raise hand function on Zoom, which will be in this lower menu you got on the reactions, then we can do one by one. Debbie, please.
Yeah, is there a way that you can, I mean, I would think you could do this, that you would take an appreciative inquiry approach and use it in a diagnostic context, in that, the two, I would think that the two are not exclusive, that you would all move between the two quite often.
Yes, and in fact, there was some very recent research into effective change that suggested that the most productive change was a mix of diagnostic and dialogic. That was more effective than either of them on their own. And when I first started working in this way, it was very much a case of being invited to help an organization with something it was already doing and trying to say, well, maybe we could also ask about this, maybe we could also inquire into that. And have you considered, and just trying to get a more kind of appreciative slant into what they were already doing. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. And it's also fair to say that when you've done an Appreciative Inquiry Summit and you're in the what happens next stage, the destiny stage, although they changed that from delivery because it put you too abruptly back into a more kind of traditional thing. It's now called destiny, but within that there may well be things that people want to do that fall lend themselves to a more diagnostic approach. So absolutely, yeah. I just wanted to say, by the way, there's a discount code for you all at the shop. It's on the screen now, just running for the next couple of weeks. NHS 15 for cards and books and things. Okay, time for more questions.
Stephanie, please.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Sarah. That was a really good presentation, and I think as an organisation we've kind of fallen into appreciative inquiry by default. We are a co-design organisation hosted by Leeds Teaching Hospitals, and we work, well, I'm an inclusive co-designer, and we look at service design and exclusionary factors within services, and they can be new services or services which are kind of midway through, looking at how we might include people. In that we do a lot of work with communities in terms of like listening to them and co-designing kind of solutions and iterations to service. And I think one of the challenges for us in this world that's moving so very quickly to digital and with a medical model as well, how do you kind of blend that kind of reactive care method, which is like the medical model, and this appreciative inquiry from the beginning when working with commissioners to ensure that the outputs of the project are then acted on? I think that's something that we struggle with, not having the funds to kind of make the changes ourselves, but being asked to come in as an agency to explore the challenges.
I think that's a very good point. And in my very early days, I used to, do investigations and write reports, and learned very quickly nothing really changed. And the thing about appreciative inquiry is the change happens in the process as well as afterwards. And this is what is really important, that when people are engaged in an appreciative inquiry process, they have different conversations with different people about different things in different ways that generate different energies and different possibilities and different mental maps, and that shift the patterns of communication and relationship within the organization. So the change is happening as you are doing the work. And then if it's an AI summit, as I said, the destiny stage, there will also be, what else do you want to do from now? Which is a kind of different thing. At the front end, how do you help commissioners understand this is an interesting question. In fact, there's a whole book that I wrote recently in Jervis Bush's series called Co-Creating Planning Teams Dialogic OD for Dialogic OD, which is all about the early work of how do you, in fact, it's on the screen here. It's all about how do you engage with the commissioner and sponsor in such a way that you create the opportunity to work in this different way from the very beginning. And it also highlights some of the kind of contraindications for working in a very co-creative way. One of which is when the leader is convinced they have the answer, and what they actually want you to do is come in and make their answer happen. This is not a good scenario for appreciative inquiry or any kind of dialogic process. They probably need an expert consultant who's happy to work in that way. So I hope that answers your question. And
that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing what you do. It sounds great.
Jean, please.
Right, I thought someone else had their hand up, but maybe it's gone down again. Sarah, are you all right for me to go, or do you want to go?
Yeah,
I'm
I've
good.
not thought about my question enough. You go.
Okay. So I really don't want to bring the mood down. I'm a real fan of this whole approach, and also around that sort of helping people find what they can do even when they feel powerless and helpless. I also think that it feels quite important to just acknowledge the state of the system at the moment, and that this isn't just helplessness people are feeling, it is utter desperation. And I just wonder what you might be able to share, Sarah, around the balance between really engaging people with finding their resourcefulness at a time when they are spent and they are burning out, if not burnt out, and they are actually disillusioned and leaving in droves, because actually that's the situation that many of our teams are working in. And I think that there is a danger of this potentially feeling misaligned with the mood and the reality for many people. And I just wonder if you could illuminate that, or anybody else who's got that conundrum at the moment.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, another one of the kind of contraindications is a system that's absolutely exhausted, because change takes energy. Even positive change takes energy. And if you haven't got that in the system, how are you going to, oops, she's gone. How are you going to be able to work with the system if it's absolutely exhausted? And sometimes people do need rescuing if things are really desperate. This is the example I usually use. If I am drowning in a river, I don't want you standing on the bank saying, well, we've got some options here. I can give you a long pole. I can throw you a rope. I could call the lifeguards. I've got a rubber ring here. Which do you think is this going to suit your current swimming proficiency or something, right? I want someone to throw me a rope and say, hang on, I can get you out. And so so there are times when people just need someone to rescue them. I don't know how that applies in your situation. So I absolutely agree that appreciative inquiry is not a panacea for every situation. And I also absolutely agree that we have, you know, it's an old adage, but it's still valid. We have to start where people are at. Wherever they are, that's where they are, and that's where we have to start. One of the things appreciative inquiry says, normally it's looking for the positive, okay? But sometimes what you're doing is you're looking for the least worst. Because what you're trying to do with the appreciative inquiry is to break up the story about it's all awful. It's all equally desperately awful. And what you're trying to do is get a more bumpy profile of what's going on. And then you can get then you can grab hold of the slightly higher bits of ground, as it were, and start. Okay, so what makes that possible? Okay, when does that happen? You know, what do you need for that, for those odd moments when you don't feel quite so desperate, and you're trying to create a story of difference between the worst and the not quite so bad, as a way of beginning to move from that sort of everybody in the pit of despair where it's all just terrible, to, well, actually, you know, it's a more nuanced landscape. So sometimes we're working with what's the least worst. It's also worth saying, and I'm sure you know this as practitioners, that when people are seriously depressed, clinically depressed, everything is grey. They really cannot see. It is part of the condition that you cannot see the good, the positive, the colour in life. So, you know, they need some other resource, I guess is what I'm saying. They're not necessarily going to respond particularly well to this because they just can't. And I suspect there probably are, you know, given what's been going on, you're talking about burnout, that's very similar, are going to be some people who cannot respond to this positivity offer. So I think you have, yes, I think you're absolutely you're right. We don't need to be going and saying, hey, I've got this brand new super duper different way of doing things that's going to make everything absolutely wonderful for everybody. That doesn't do any of us any favors. It's really about how you're feeling and how you're talking. Is this changing things for you? Is this achieving what you want? If not, is there another way we can talk about these things? And the expression that is often used is, which I find very helpful, is every problem is the expression of a frustrated dream. Every problem is the expression of a frustrated dream. In other words, if we didn't have a sense of how things could be, we wouldn't know that things are wrong. If we didn't have a sense of the dream, we wouldn't know that we weren't there. So we can talk, and not the immediate flip, but we can talk about the dream, and we are still talking about the same thing, but almost like the other end of the telescope. And that's, so there's different ways you can encourage people to come into a different conversation with you. No guarantees. I hope that helps. Oh, I can see you again now. I hope that helps.
Thank
No
you.
easy answers.
Thank you. Olivia had her hand up. Olivia, do you think your question was answered then?
Yeah, I mean, I was asking similar questions about sort of organisational readiness for it and sort of contraindications, as well as some of the obvious great benefits, which I think you've expanded on. So thank you very much.
I would say another contraindication is a really deep level of cynicism towards the leadership from the staff, and a really big rift in the group you want to work with. Those are red flags for some other work needs to be done first for me.
Yeah, sort of engaging with the reality. I mean, and there are some really toxic teams as well, aren't there, where quite a lot is awful as well. So sadly.
I've worked with groups that haven't been in the same room for the last year, and I've worked with groups where the story is everybody's in the toilet crying all the time. So yeah, they need something. They do need something different, but it takes work to get to the stage where you can now be ready to move to do something different. It's interesting. People have to let go. You know, we talk about the courage to hope, and it takes courage to hope. And when things feel hopeless and helpless, in a bizarre way, that's quite comfortable, because I'm not going to be disappointed. If I dare to hope, if I get up the courage to actually hope, now I'm vulnerable. Now I can be disappointed. Now I can be slapped about again. Whereas if I stay down here where it's all hopeless and it's all helpless, no one's going to let me down. So it takes courage to move into a different place.
Interesting. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Sarah. We are 3 minutes past the hour. Feels like it's a good moment to wrap it up. Thank you so much. That was a great session, and a couple of people had to leave now at the hour exactly, but I just read 1,000 comments just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everybody who participated as well.
Yeah, it was lovely to have so many of you here, and thank you so much for your great questions, by the way. Not just saying that, really engaging and interesting questions. So thank you. I hope they're helpful to other people as well.
Hope to see you folks in the Learning for Excellency. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.